Our picnic lunch is packed and we're ready for a day trip to Yosemite National Park. We drove in through Highway 140 going through the beautiful town of Mariposa. We're getting ready to go through the kiosk right now, and the nice thing is there's not much of a wait time. You definitely want to show up here early, at least by 9 a.m. By 11 o'clock in the morning, all the parking spaces are filled up, so definitely plan your trip accordingly. This is driving in toward the valley after you pass the kiosk. And the water is so high right now. We're here right now during the end of June. And because we had so much rain and snow, there's tons of water. So tons of water, that means some really huge waterfalls. And that's why we're here, to enjoy the waterfalls this time of year. Now, usually if you get into the park around August, September, the waterfalls are pretty much dried up. So no matter what the weather is in Yosemite, whether you're getting a lot of rain or snow throughout the year, you always want to get here in the earlier parts of the year to enjoy the waterfalls, at least to see the best of them. The valley is always beautiful, no matter what, though. Yosemite National Park is in California's Sierra Nevada mountains. It's famed for its giant ancient sequoia trees and for tunnel view, the iconic vista of towering Bridal Veil Fall, and the granite cliffs of El Capitan and Half Dome. In Yosemite Village are shops, restaurants, lodging, the Yosemite Museum, and the Ansel Adams Gallery, with prints of the photographers' renowned black and white landscapes of the area. Yosemite National Park is an American national park in the state of California, surrounded on the southeast by Sierra National Forest and on the northwest by Stanislaus National Forest. The park is managed by the National Park Service and covers an area of 759,620 acres in 4 counties, centered in Tuolumne and Mariposa, extending north and east to Mono and south to Madera County. Designated a World Heritage Site in 1984, Yosemite is internationally recognized for its cliffs, waterfalls, clear streams, giant sequoia groves, lakes, mountains, meadows, glaciers, and biological diversity. Almost 95% of the park is designated wilderness. Yosemite is one of the largest and least fragmented habitat blocks in the Sierra Nevada, and the park supports a diversity of plants and animals. The geology of the Yosemite area is characterized by granite rocks and remnants of older rock. About 10 million years ago, the Sierra Nevada was uplifted and tilted to form its unique slopes, which increased the steepness of stream and riverbeds, resulting in the formation of deep, narrow canyons. About 1 million years ago, glaciers formed at higher elevations, which eventually melted and moved downslope, cutting and sculpting the U-shaped valley that attracts so many visitors to its scenic vistas. European American settlers first entered Yosemite Valley itself in 1851. There are earlier instances of others traveling, entering the valley, but James D. Savage is credited with discovering the area that became Yosemite National Park. Despite Savage and others claiming their discovery of Yosemite, the region and valley itself have been inhabited for nearly 4,000 years, although humans may have visited the area as long as 8,000 to 10,000 years ago. Yosemite was critical to the development of the national park idea. Galen Clark and others lobbied to protect Yosemite Valley from development, ultimately leading to President Abraham Lincoln's signing of the Yosemite Grant of 1864, which declared Yosemite as a federally preserved land. It was not until 1890 that John Muir led a successful movement which had Congress establish Yosemite Valley and its surrounding areas as a national park. This helped pave the way for the national park system. Yosemite draws about 4 million visitors each year, and most visitors spend the majority of their time in the 7 square miles of Yosemite Valley. The park set a visitation record in 2016, surpassing 5 million visitors for the first time in its history. The park began requiring reservations to access the park during peak periods starting in 2020 as a response to the rise in visitors. You've been looking at pictures of Yosemite Falls, the upper and lower Yosemite Falls, and it is just flowing beautifully this year. When you get to the bridge by the lower falls, it just blows your hair back. There's so much pressure and your camera lenses get all wet from the mist. Yeah, it's really, the falls are spectacular this year. If you have a chance, come on up and see them. I'm going to tell you a little history about Yosemite National Park while you enjoy some of these photos. The indigenous natives of Yosemite called themselves the Ahwahnee-Neechi, meaning dwellers. In Ahwahnee, the Ahwahnee-Neechi people was the only tribe that lived in the boundaries of Yosemite National Park, but other tribes lived in its surrounding areas. Together they formed a larger indigenous population in California called the Southern South Miwok. They're related to the northern Paiute and Mono tribes. Other tribes like the Central Sierra Miwoks and the Yokuts, who both lived in the San Joaquin Valley and Central California, visited Yosemite to trade and intermarry with the Ahwahnee-Neechi. This resulted in a blending of culture which helped preserve indigenous people's presence in Yosemite after early American settlements and urban development threatened their survival. Vegetation and game in the region were similar to modern times. Acorns were a staple to their diet, as well as other seeds and plants, salmon and deer. A major event impacting the native population of Yosemite and all of California in the mid-19th century was the California Gold Rush, which drew more than 90,000 European Americans to the area in less than 2 years, causing competition for resources between gold miners and the local natives. Before large amounts of European settlers arrived in California, about 70 years before the gold rush, the indigenous population was estimated to be 300,000. Once the gold rush started, it dropped down to 150,000, and just 10 years later, only about 50,000 remained. The reason for such a decline in the Native American population results from numerous reasons, including disease, birth rate decreases, starvations, and the conflicts from the American Indian Wars. The conflict in Yosemite is known as the Mariposa War. It started in December of 1850, where California funded a state militia to drive Native people from contested territory, also known as Indigenous traditional and sacred homelands. The goal was to suppress Native American resistance to American expansion. In retaliation to the extermination and domestication of their people and loss of their lands and resources, Yosemite Indian tribes often stole from settlers and miners, sometimes killing them. Both actions seen as a tribute for the great losses they experienced. The war and formation of the Mariposa Battalion was partially the result of a single incident involving James Savage, a trader in Fresno, California, whose trading post was attacked in December of 1850. After the incident, Savage rallied other miners and gained the support of local officials to pursue revenge and a full-out war against the natives. That is how he was appointed United States Army Major and leader the Mariposa Battalion in the beginning of 1851. He and Captain John Bowling were responsible for pursuing the Awanichi people that were being led by Chief Tenaya and driving them as far west as possible out of Yosemite. In March 1851, under the command of Savage, the Mariposa Battalion captured about 70 Awanichi and planned to take them to a reservation in Fresno, but they all managed to escape. Later in May, under the command of Bowling, the battalion captured 35 Awanichi, including Chief Tenaya, and marched them to the reservation, but most were allowed to eventually leave and the rest escaped. Tenaya and others fled across the Sierra Nevada and settled with the Mono Lake Paiutes. Tenaya and some of his companions were ultimately killed in 1853, either over stealing horses or a gambling conflict, and the survivors of Tenaya's group and other Awanichi were absorbed into the Mono Lake Paiute tribe. Accounts from this battalion were the first well-documented reports of ethnic Europeans entering Yosemite Valley. Attached to Savage's unit was Dr. Lafayette Burnell, who later wrote about his awestruck impressions of the valley and the discovery of the Yosemite. Burnell is credited with naming Yosemite Valley based on his interviews with Chief Tenaya. Burnell wrote that Chief Tenaya was the founder of the Awani colony. Burnell falsely believed that the word Yosemite meant full-grown grizzly bear. In fact, Yosemite was derived from the Miwok term from the Awanichi people, Yosemite, meaning they are killers. After the Mariposa War, a number of Native Americans continued to live in the Yosemite area, despite their overall population being severely decreased in the present-day park's boundary. The remaining Yosemite Awanichi tribe members there were forced to relocate to an Indian village constructed in 1851 by the state government. They learned to live within this camp and their limited rights, adapting to the changing environment by taking advantage of the growing tourism industry through employment opportunities and creating small businesses from selling goods and providing the services. Despite the integration of indigenous people into the growing American settlement and tourism industry, their villages were destroyed and their people were forced to relocate 4 different times throughout the park's history. The U.S. Army was responsible for the village's destruction in 1851 and 1906, and the National Park Service was responsible for it in 1929 and 1969. In 1969, the National Park Service evicted the remaining Native people from their residences and destroyed their village as part of a firefighting exercise. A reconstructed Indian village of Awani has been erected behind the Yosemite Museum, located next to the Yosemite Valley Visitor Center. By the late 19th century, the population of all native inhabitants in Yosemite was difficult to determine. Estimates range from smaller numbers, such as 30 individuals, to several hundred. The Awanichi people and their descendants were even harder to identify. The last full-blooded Awanichi died in 1931. Her name was Tutuya and Maria Librado. She was the granddaughter of Chief Tenaya and one of the many forced out of her ancestral homelands in the Yosemite National Park. Now the Awanichi live through the memory of their descendants, their fellow Yosemite natives, and through museums like the Yosemite, California Museum exhibit in the Smithsonian and the Yosemite Museum. As a method of self-preservation and resilience, the Indigenous people of California proposed treaties in 1851 and 1852, which would have established land reservations for them, but Congress refused to sign them. The quest for justice and sovereignty by Yosemite natives has been ongoing for well over 100 years. The southern Miwok Nation is still seeking tribal sovereignty and federal recognition, which is critical for their well-being and cultural preservation. Progress has been made in terms of the relationship between the U.S. government and tribal governments and the National Park Service, creating policies to protect indigenous sacred sites and allow natives to return to their homelands and use national park resources. There's so much history of Yosemite National Park and so much more to discover when you get here. You've been road trekking with Row and Low. I hope you enjoyed our segment of Yosemite National Park, and when you do find the time, it's such a wondrous place to come and enjoy, whether it's for a full day or a week camp out. Thank you for watching.